Given the New York Giants' struggles since 2023 onward, it's time to get real about head coach Brian Daboll. Locked on Giants starts now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Train. I'm your host, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Or if you are making us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, Giant fans, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to get real about head coach Brian Daboll. All right, there's just one thing that's kind of been sticking out like a sore thumb that I don't think is being discussed enough. And I want to touch upon that topic in the first segment. Then in segment 2, I want to take a look at quarterback Russell Wilson. And there's one area in particular that so far, at any rate, he has vastly improved in from last year with the Steelers. And I think this is an important area that we need to talk about. And then in segment 3, we're going to take a look at some of the emerging storylines for the Giants' Week 3 game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Sunday Night Football. Yep. Another primetime game. Giants 0-2, Chiefs 0-2. One of those teams is going to come out a winner, I would think, unless there's a tie. But one of those teams is going to come out a winner. And we'll talk about some of the storylines leading up to that game. So again, welcome on into everybody. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about Brian Daboll. All right. Now, when Brian Daboll was hired back in 2022, I thought it was a good hire for a couple reasons. I thought, this is a guy who coached under Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, and who had also had an opportunity to coach under different programs, if you will. Sean McDermott, obviously, being one of them. The fact that Daboll was an offensive guru with Buffalo, that he had developed Josh Allen, I thought all of those things were pluses, okay? But there's one trait that I'm seeing in Daboll, and I have to wonder how that's affecting the Giants. And what that trait is I'm not quite sure that Daboll isn't walking a tightrope here with regards to being the player's friend versus being their authority figure. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I go back to last year. And before I get into this, I'm not picking on Malik Nabers. I'm just using this as an example. Malik Nabers came right out and at the time criticized the quarterback play by saying, hey, I was open, and just, having kind of an attitude, if you will, throwing his teammate under the bus. And when that comment was relayed back to Daboll, he basically said, well, yeah, he was open. Instead of, kind of handling it a little differently, he basically allowed Nabers to throw the quarterback under the bus. Now, Nabers happened to be correct, but the second you allow players to throw their teammates under the bus, that is not a good thing. We saw again with Nabers this year in the Week 1 opener. He was upset with the energy on the sideline. And we caught a glimpse on the TV screen of Nabers going at it with Daboll. And at the end, they kind of kissed and made up, if you will. But Nabers just still seemed kind of, miffed at what he had witnessed. Then we have the James Hudson situation. Now, Daboll has spoken about how he loves James Hudson's aggressiveness. Okay, that's all well and good. But when that aggressiveness is not corralled in, and the guy is not held accountable, then it becomes a problem. And you go back to training camp when Hudson was showing aggression. Okay. I remember he got into it, I think it was with Kayvon Thibodeau on a one-on-one drill. In the spring, he got into it with somebody. It was just a matter of time until he was going to boil over. And we saw him boil over in the game against Dallas when he just, kept messing up. Then he was pulled out of the game and he went ballistic on the sidelines. All right. So what does all this have to do with Daboll? You can't be the player's friend. You can't encourage bad behavior, if you will. There has to be a fine line in which you draw the line in the sand and you say, okay, it's okay to be aggressive. It's okay to be a leader. But when you overstep those bounds and you start to hurt the team, and then I've got to come down on you and correct the issue before it turns into a problem. Now you're probably saying, well, he took James Hudson out of the game, so he held him accountable. Folks, I don't think it should have ever gotten to that point. I think if we go back to the spring and the summer when Hudson was showing over-aggression, if you will, that's when it should have been addressed. And, did Daboll maybe have a talk with Hudson? He probably did. I don't know if he did or didn't. But the problem continued. And I just get the impression, just my observation here, that sometimes Daboll is a little too much of a player's coach, more of their friend, if you will, as opposed to an authority figure. And it's interesting because, as you know, I've covered the Giants for a long time. So I was there for the entire duration of the Tom Coughlin era. And I remember Tom Coughlin in the beginning, if a player stepped out of line, Coughlin nipped that in the bud. Now, towards the end of his tenure, he let Odell Beckham Jr. kind of get away with stuff at the expense of, at the time, I think he was trying to salvage a season. So that was kind of a disappointment from Tom Coughlin. But the point I'm getting at is you can't let the inmates run the asylum, as they say. And, Daboll, I can appreciate that he wants to protect the players. I can appreciate that he wants to keep things behind closed doors. But when things spill out to the public and they're put on display on television on game day, then you've got to say to yourself, okay, does this guy really have, a firm grip on the locker room? The players will say that he does, which you would expect them to. But before something really, really escalates, now the Hudson thing, you could say was a big escalation. Before something major happens, I just feel like Daboll needs to be a little tougher on these guys and not be so much their friend, their buddy. So, maybe he doesn't have that in him. He is who he is. And apparently his approach worked in 2022. But since then, can we honestly say that, these little blow-ups, these little flare-ups have been good for the team? They haven't. And I just would like to see some of this negative energy that comes out, especially after a loss. There's got to be a way to parlay it or, throw cold water on it before it becomes a little bit of a simmering fire. So Daboll, you can't say that he's a new head coach anymore because this is his fourth season, but he's still growing as a head coach. And he's made a lot of changes, I think, from the first year of his tenure. He's changed, for example, playing starters in the preseason. He's changed up, going from 7-on-7s and eliminating them, bringing them back, little things that he's changed. And I do think at the end of the day, he could be a very good coach for this team. But some of these little flare-ups, like I said, these little side shows, if you will, he's got to get those, under control. Thankfully, they don't happen every week, but we're 2 games into the season. We've had 2 such things that are, kind of raising a yellow flag, if you will. So we'll see how it goes the rest of the season. Obviously, a win will cure a lot of issues, but yeah, let's see how that goes because that's something to keep an eye on. Because I think the one thing that's going to ultimately do Daboll in, if he doesn't, ensure that he gets in front of it, is if he loses control of the locker room. And I'm not saying he has, not even close right now, but these little flare ups here and there, keep an eye on that because that's how you can easily lose the locker room. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to take a look at Russell Wilson. And so far through 2 games, what is the biggest change or the biggest improvement he has made from last year? I'll tell you what that is right after this. Hey, Giant fans, Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Hey, Giant fans, NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. That's why you need to check out Game Time, the app that gives you the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included so that the price you see is the price you pay. See where your seats are, and the closer it gets to showtime, you stand to save even more. So go on and take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, Giant fans. Now we're going to talk about Russell Wilson. And as you can see by the graphic on the screen, if you happen to be watching on YouTube, Russell Wilson was named one of Locked On NFL's top performers in week 2. Now, if you don't have YouTube on your screen, Wilson, 73% completion rate, 450 yards, passing, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, a 123 rating. Now, this is kind of interesting because I was going to do a segment on Russell anyway, and specifically what has been one of the big differences for him since coming to the Giants. Now, one of the concerns from last year to this year was the amount of time that Wilson sometimes holds on to the ball. And the longer a quarterback's going to hold on to the ball, the less likely he's going to have any kind of success. He's going to either, take a sack that he shouldn't or make a mistake or something's going to go astray. So according to True Media, I went back and I looked up some of his stats from last year and this year, specifically average time to throw. Now, when Russell Wilson had 2.5 seconds or more, 2.5 seconds is actually like the threshold that you use to kind of determine if the quarterback's getting the ball out of his hands quicker. Russell was 17 of 35, 48.6%, 320 yards, 9.1 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 1 interceptions, and had 4 sacks. All right, that was last year. Also, last year, when he threw the ball in fewer than 2.5 seconds, he was 33 of 43, 76.7% completion rate, 367 yards, 8.5 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, 1 sack. The average yards per attempt, obviously a little lower, but the completion percentage much, much higher. All right, so that was last year. How is he doing this year? He is averaging 2.64 seconds to throw through 2 games. So that's, compared to last year when his average time to throw was 2.85 seconds, that's an improvement. Now, why is this important? The Giants' offensive line. Now, last year, I think you might be able to say that Wilson had a little bit better offensive line in front of him with the Steelers. The Giants' offensive line been shaky. Let's call it for what it is. All right. So let's take a look just real quick. The pass blocking efficiency rating of the Giants' offensive line this year, 86.7, according to Pro Football Focus. They've allowed 22 pressures, which puts them on pace to finish with 187 pressures, which would be a decrease of 28 pressures from last year when they finished with a 81.7 pass blocking efficiency rating. Now, I say this all the time, folks. A quarterback who gets the ball out of his hand quickly can help the offensive line. And I think we can all agree that the Giants' offensive line so far through 2 games hasn't been quite what I think they were looking for. I think they were looking for that unit, given the continuity, at least at 4 of the positions. They were looking for that unit to really be a strength. I don't know that we can say that it's been a strength, in all honesty. And it has nothing to do with the fact so much that Andrew Thomas hasn't been in there. It just has to do with the play of the interior, which is where most of the pressure seems to come up. So Russell Wilson in improving, and that was something, by the way, they worked on with him all summer long and all spring for that matter, getting the ball out of his hand quicker. And so far through 2 games, he appears to have done just that. And again, that's going to help the Giants offense moving forward, because here's the thing. Ideally, you want the Giants to hit some of those deep passes. And last week, we saw some of those deep passes happening. On most of them, Wilson had enough time to get the ball out, but he also made quick reads and got the ball out of his hand quickly. So overall, I would say through 2 games, and I know it's early, the first game, I guess we could call it a throwaway, even though I hate to call it a throwaway because it does count. But Wilson delivering what I think the Giants were looking for from him. And the big improvement from him, like I said, is getting the ball out of his hands a lot quicker, because that's helping his offensive line, especially as it struggles and tries to find its footing. And that's going to be important moving forward, because as I'll discuss in the next segment, there could be some injuries that are going to necessitate changes on the offensive line. So on that note, actually, we'll take our final break. When I come back, we'll talk about the storylines, including that offensive line, when we come back. Hey, Giant fans, the NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure that you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. In this segment, we're going to talk about some storylines leading up to the Giants' Week 3 game against the Kansas City Chiefs. It is the 2025 home opener for the New York Giants. Both teams 0-2. One of them is going to be 0-3 by the end of the night. One of them is going to be 1-2 by the end of the night. Let's hope, against all hope, that the Giants are the ones who are 1-2 at the end of the night. All right. So that being said, let's take a look at some of the emerging storylines ahead of this week's game. And we'll get into some of this in a little bit more detail on tomorrow's crossover show, by the way, but I wanted to touch upon a few of these storylines. Okay. Now, in the last segment, I mentioned the offensive line and how they possibly could have some change up there. We'll start with Andrew Thomas. Now, Andrew Thomas last week made probably his most significant progress all since, he came off PUP. And I say that because he was able to practice back-to-back days, limited. All right. Now, I think if Andrew Thomas can practice all 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, on a limited basis, I think he could make his debut, his 2025 debut on Sunday. And it would be perfect given the opponent that they're going to face. That Chiefs defense, that pass rush, that's where you want to have your best player on the field. So obviously, as I tape this, it is Tuesday night. I haven't seen the injury report, but I'm hoping, against all hope, that Andrew Thomas is good to go for that game. Now, speaking of the offensive line, there were some injuries to come out of the Dallas game. Head coach Brian Daboll said that there were several guys who were being checked. He did not say who, but one guy who was reported to have had an injury and who went for post-game x-rays, left guard John Runyon Jr., who, according to, I think it was The Athletic who reported it initially, felt a crack in his back. So what is going to be Runyon Jr.'s status? Is he going to be good to go? Is he going to be limited? What's going to happen there? And if he is, do they move Greg Van Roten over to left guard? Do they put Aaron Stinney in there? And oh, by the way, did Marcus Bowe play well enough, which I think he did, to warrant more of a presence on that offensive line? The interior of that offensive line has not been the best. And I think it's just a matter of time before we see a shakeup there. Will that shakeup be this week? Ideally, you want to keep the same line. But if the same line is not, blowing open holes for the run game, if they're shaky in pass pro, are you really doing yourself any favor? Probably not. So I could see a world where maybe the Giants change things up a little bit on the offensive line. I'll be curious to see if that's true. But, they might think that they're fine. So we'll see if that is what comes to fruition. All right. A big storyline, I think, is going to be resiliency. Now, I kind of spoke about this a little last week, but this week more so, I think it's a storyline. And I say that because the Giants are coming off a very long, emotionally draining, physically draining game against Dallas. All right. That was a game that they should have won. They know they should have won it. They lost it because they couldn't hold on. And that was a very deflating loss. So, ideally, you'd like to see them flush it and move on and say, okay, you know what? It's a new week. Everybody's 0-0. We want to be 1-0 at the end of the day. But what's the emotion level going to be? What's the energy level going to be? Because as I've said before, when the losses start to pile up, you can only take so much before it starts to affect your, demeanor. And I don't think it's, going to be, at least not yet. I think it's too early to say that it's going to affect their demeanor. But let's be real. That loss on Sunday to the Cowboys, that was a hard one. That was a gut punch. And how quickly can those guys rebound from that? I mention this now because week one, before the Commanders game, the locker room was kind of lively. The week after the Commanders game, maybe not as lively as it was. All right. The music wasn't blaring. There wasn't as much, loosey-goosey in the locker room. Week 2 to week 3, I'm curious to see what the demeanor is going to be in the locker room. So just something to kind of keep it in the back of your mind. The other thing, and I don't know if this is going to change because quite honestly, I think the reason why the Giants made this change, at least for week 2, was because of special teams, but keep an eye on the running back situation. All right. Now, Tyrone Tracy was RB1 for week 1. He was still listed as RB1 on the depth chart for week 2, but yet Cam Scatterbo got most of the carries. And that brought up the question of, did the Giants maybe make a change? Did they decide, okay, Scatterbo's going to be RB1 and Tracy's now going to be RB2? Well, I don't know that that's the case, to be honest with you. I think why the Giants took Tracy off of offense was because they had him do kick returns. I would expect this week Xavier Gipson is going to start doing kick returns, which should free up Tracy to return to contributing more on the offense. But still, watching the snap counts and just, watching Scatterbo run, and I thought he had a good game, by the way, as a runner. Is there going to be a shift on the depth chart to where maybe Scatterbo becomes running back 1 and Tracy running back 2? And we can't forget about Devin Singletary, because Singletary had, a lot of snaps too last week. Again, I think that was though to fill in because Tracy was on special teams. But that's something to keep an eye on. Might not happen this week, but maybe by the season's end. Could that be the case? Well, hang in there, folks, because as hard as it might be for this season, we're going to find out if indeed that's going to be the case. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. As always, thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you made us your first listen of the day, thank you for that as well. The NFL season is finally here. For your next listen, get a double dose of Locked On NFL podcasts. Tyler the Madman Rowland gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day, while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I will see you again tomorrow here on the Locked On Giants podcast.